Hi, I'm Katina Horton, the Love and Freedom Toxic Relationship Recovery Coach and Bible teacher. And today I'm going to talk about the masquerade party of lying prophets, false intentions, and disguises, part two. Now, yesterday we entered the Old Testament school where a masquerade party was being held, right? And we opened door number one, where the man of God is killed by a lion on his way back home, right? And this was because of disobeying the Lord's instructions to neither eat nor drink nor return by the way that he came. And so all of this came about because he listened to the advice of the old prophet, who was sent by Satan himself to steal, kill, and destroy him. Okay. And next, we opened up door number two, and there were four individuals leading this saga. We have King Jeroboam, his wife, the prophet Ahijah, and then we have King Jeroboam and his wife's son, Abijah. Okay. Jeroboam sinned through idolatrous worship of golden calves. And in so doing, he led the Israelites straight off of a cliff into sin and idolatrous lifestyles, right? And so God had had enough. He had simply had enough. And in order to judge King Jeroboam, what he decided is that he would cause an illness to come upon King Jeroboam's son, right? And who he ends up dying, okay? And so King Jeroboam's wife, though, prior to their son's death, she went to the prophet Ahijah to get a word, right? She disguised herself as someone else, hoping that the word of God was going to be different, as if God could not help Ahijah, the prophet, to see behind her disguise since he was going blind, right? But she disguised herself in doing so. However, their son still died and was buried, and the people of the town mourned for him. And so today we're just going to open up another door, okay? And what door is that? Is door number three. We've got Joab, we've got a wise woman from Tekoa, and then we've got David. They're all standing there, right? And so right before we open this door, we're going to stand in the hallway a little bit longer. And I don't think it's fair to go inside of this masquerade party and to interact with these characters without getting the backdrop. We need a background story on these characters before we interact with them, right? And so we're going to stand in the hallway a little bit longer, and I'm going to get you caught up on what happened prior to what we're walking the door into on, right? Prior to that scene, right? And so we're going to catch up on what happened right before we arrived. So we've got Amnon, and Amnon is David's son, right? He's a narcissist himself. He has been deceived by Satan and a spirit of lust into thinking that he could have his half sister Tamar for himself. Okay. And to show you how sick of a situation that this is, right? Thinking that he would have his half sister Tamar, right? It just shows you how deep things can go when the spirit of deception sets in, right? And so the scripture refers to Amnon being tormented and making himself ill with this lust for his sister. And although we might think of just how terrible that this is, right? We lust ourselves. We make ourselves sick over clothing and purses and shoes and money, having money in the bank, having wealth, right? Giving off some type of persona for an image that we're not. We allow these things to consume us because why? We see other people with it and we think that we've got to have it too. We've got to compete, right? And so what happens is whenever anything consumes any of us, right? It takes a hold of our bodies, right? And our flesh is just lusting and lusting for that thing until we get it. And we see that we really didn't need that thing after all, or we use that thing and we use it for a little bit, but then it done lost its value after a while, right? And so what we want to do, we want to look at 2 Samuel, the 13th chapter, and the first through the 6 verses, right? It says, now Absalom, David's son, had a beautiful sister whose name was Tamar. And after a time, Amnon, David's son, loved her. And Amnon was so tormented that he made himself ill because of his sister Tamar, for she was a virgin, and it seemed impossible to Amnon to do anything to her. But Amnon had a friend, and there go that good old word, but, right? Whose name was Jonadab, the son of Shemaiah, David's brother. And Jonadab was a very crafty man. And remember, the word crafty was also used to describe Satan. So you know it couldn't be anything good going on there if they're describing him as a very crafty man, right? Okay. And so then it says that, and he said to him, O son of the king, why are you so haggard morning after morning? Will you not tell me? Amnon said to him, I love Tamar, my brother Absalom's sister. Jonadab said to him, lie down on your bed and pretend to be ill. And when your father comes to see you, say to him, let my sister Tamar come and give me bread to eat and prepare the food in my sight, that I might see it and eat from her hand. Now that sounds like a simple request, right? Except think about it. This is Jonadab preparing Amnon to violate his sister. This is some sick stuff, right? So Amnon lay down and pretended to be ill. And when the king came to see him, Amnon said to the king, please let my sister Tamar come and make a couple of cakes in my sight, that I might eat from her hand. So Amnon was offered the cakes by Tamar, his sister, right? And he refuses to eat these cakes. And then he sends all of the servants out. And so you know this couldn't be good, right? You know what this is leading up to. And he asked her to bring the food to him in his chamber, okay? And this is the point when she is attacked, okay? And she tries to reason with him several times over. Amnon is not to be reasoned with. He wants what it is that he wants, okay? Because Satan has taken over his mind. After entering the soul tie door with Tamar, remember the soul tie door is when a lust for leads to a took for, then you in the soul tie door, okay? And so the lust for leads to a took for, which leads to a soul tie door. And then you might be wondering, what is the took for? The took for is when you've taken something that God has not ordained for you, okay? He's not put a stamp of approval on it, right? But you have gone on and tagged his name like you on social media and as if he's approved it, right? And unfortunately, unknowingly as well, David has become proxy for all of this to happen. He had no way of knowing this is what Amnon was planning on doing, right? But the sad thing is he sent Tamar over there, okay? He sent his daughter unknowingly into the lion's den, right? Which was Amnon's house. And this is like Amnon, he basically had, when you think about it, he had the perfect attributes for a narcissist, okay? This violation that he had was his sister. It was nothing but an act of lust, a transaction, if you will, right? And a transition. This was a transitionally supplied, soul-tied, toxic relationship, plain and simple. And so I want you to remember that transitionally supplied, soul-tied, toxic relationships are those relationships where you are helping, you're being supplied, you're supply, right? Like a computer supply. You are powering up the narcissistic partner with enough get up and go, right? You're his emotional regulator, so to speak, and able to help in order to help him to transition over through a major life event. And unfortunately, in this case, the major life event for Amnon was to get rid of this lust that was going on in his flesh, right? To satisfy that lust, that craving that was going on in his flesh and in his soul, right? And so uh his major life event was his self-deceived, okay? Self-inflicted, tormented, and perverted lust for his half sister Tamar, right? And so she helped serve that purpose of helping Amnon transition from self deceived, tormented, and perverted to one of relief. Literally, a state of relief. That's all that was, right? And so after violating Tamar, he has his servants to bolt the door after her. And it makes you wonder why, why would he have to bolt the door? Had he done this type of thing before? Right? What would be the reasoning? Right? Because all you have to do is just put somebody out and say, I don't ever want you coming back here again. That's all he had to do, right? But that's not what he did. It's a whole nother level when someone leaves and you don't not only do you like lock the door, you bolt the door, right? So that makes sure that they're not going to get back inside of there, right? And not only did he tie his own soul up, right? Because he walked through that soul tied door, but he knew he had ensnared Tamar's soul as well. But bolting the door, that leaves me to wonder, like I said, if if other women had become victim of what it is that he had done and had to keep it on the down low, as they would say back in the day, right? Soul ties leave you in the same state as a drug or alcohol addiction, right? Your body is craving the other person's body because your soul is triple tied to them. And remember, your soul is your mind, your will, and your emotions. So your mind, will, and emotions is triple tied into this other individual, right? And your body is craving for that. Okay. And you end up going through, your body has to go through these cravings of painful withdrawal. Okay. And that basically, long story short, is two words that described it. You're hooked. That's it. Okay. And as Tamar is leaving from Amnon's house, okay, she's leaving his house. She rips off part of her beautiful tunic, right? And this is the tunic that the virgin daughters wore. She ripped it off and she's wailing and she's just looking a hot mess at that point, right? And it's verse 15 of Second Samuel that gives you an idea of what went down right before she left out that door. It says, then Amnon hated her with very great hatred. Okay. So that the hatred with which he hated her was greater than the love with which he had loved her. And Amnon said to her, get up, go. Wow. And so what happens is that it helps you to understand with a narcissistic individual where they are refusing, number one, to deal with the shame that they have that they're swimming in all the time, right? And then they're also refusing to deal with their actions. And then third, they refuse to deal with the consequences of their actions. And we cannot force, because we all have been granted free will by God, right? That's all a part of that love and freedom operating system. We've been granted free will. So we cannot make someone take ownership, right, of the consequences, right, of their actions, nor of their actions, the actions themselves, okay? And so what happens is, instead of doing that, in lieu of that, right, what they would do is they rather text you, call you, email you, catch up with you in person, and rip your soul apart and let you have it, right? So that you become their poison container, right? To drown you in their sea of shame and guilt, than for them to have to take that upon themselves, okay? And what happens is that they are trying to keep the portrayal of the image which is directly incongruent with their false sense of self. But they will do anything to keep up this charade, so to speak, okay? And so what Amnon did to his sister was cold, it was callous, and it was calculated, right? Not only has he violated her, okay, but he set up a seed of rejection in her soul, right? And when you're soul tied to someone who's just been abused, basically what you're doing, you're taking their soul, right? And you're tying up their soul and their body with cravings to keep wanting to come back to you for more abuse and violation. It's a very sick and twisted cycle. And so I want to back up just a little bit and I want to look at the seed rather of rejection again, okay? Remember, we inherited trauma from the Garden of Eden, right? Satan convinced Eve that God's love was not enough, that God himself was not enough, and that she indeed herself was not enough, right? And so he made her think that she was basically a manufactured reject, is the only way I can think of describing it, right? And that she was missing out on something because he did not make her like him and the other gods knowing between good and evil, right? This is how Satan deceived Eve into perceiving, right, that she had deficiencies, but she did not have those deficiencies. But this is what he led her to thinking, right? So we inherited some of that. And then we ended up with the double whammy for those of us who have had to deal with the spirit and seed of rejection in our own individual families, which is what David ended up having to deal with, right? And so what happened is that this seed of rejection came from our family's love story garden. Either our parents had dysfunctional patterns of behavior / coping mechanisms, or they were unavailable, or as in Hosea 4:6, they had a lack of knowledge. There was just simply a lack of knowledge going on there. And that scripture says that my people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. Okay. And so what happens is that when we were babies up till 18 months, we had either one of four attachments. We had the secure attachment, which means we securely attached to our parents / caregivers, or we might have had an anxious attachment where sometimes we securely attached, other times we didn't, for either reasons of the parents having lack of knowledge, being unavailable, emotionally unavailable, and or them having their own coping mechanisms / dysfunctional behaviors, patterns of behaviors themselves. And then we might have had the avoidant attachment, which means that you isolate yourself from your parents and caregivers, right? Because of the way you receive love, and or you are giving them something different that they are requesting from you. Okay, the avoidant can be one of two things or both. It can be a both and situation. And then lastly, we have the fearful avoidant attachment, where it's a push and pull type of thing, where the child does not learn healthy boundaries. The parents are erratic, neglectful, abusive, and the child is constantly under a state of unpredictability, just erratic things happening, and then of being in an unwanted, unloved state, and them needing the parents, but not trusting the parents. Okay. Two different things, right? And so we get all these different attachment styles going on. Okay. And so when you take David's children, you can't ignore the fact that David himself had a seed of rejection. You can't ignore that. His father never brought him out with the other sons when Samuel wanted to anoint the king. We cannot ignore that, right? And then his relationship with his brothers, we can tell that that was not good, because David's father sent him over to check on the brothers and to take them some food. And then you have Eliab David's older brother, who belittled him by saying, like, what are you doing here? And he didn't want David to talk to the other men on the line, and like, oh, those little few sheep you got, those few sheep you have, who's taking care of them? So anytime somebody starts sticking the words little and few in front of something, that little job, you got that little business. Yeah, I heard you got that little calling you're doing. A lot of times they are belittling, right? And one downing what it is that you're doing compared to what they are doing. So his older brother, Eliab, not only did he belittle and devalue David's purpose, which at that time was keeping the sheep. And even though David had already been anointed king, he had devalued him, right? And then projected onto him his own heart purpose, his own heart's posture, rather, right? Of telling him that he knew he had all of this stuff going on in his heart, which at the time David did not. Okay. And so what happens is that after this, David works for Saul. He becomes Saul's personal musician slash emotional pacifier. And then along with that, he also is getting a paycheck from Saul, right? And then Saul serves as his spiritual father. So you have all of these roles that's connecting David to Saul and vice versa, which is setting up a soul tie between them. And remember, Saul has a seed and a spirit of insecurity. Okay. And then once God took the kingship away from Saul, Saul then ended up having a double whammy of another seed of rejection. So not only the seed of rejection he inherited from Eve, from the Garden of Eden, but then he's got the a double whammy of the seed of rejection because of God letting him know that obedience is better than sacrifice. And like, buddy, basically what you did, I'm paraphrasing it. Long story short, this is not good what you did, and I'm not pleased with it, and I'm taking the kingdom away from you, from somebody else that's going to do right by it, right? And so you've got all of this that tied David to Saul. And then you've got the other thing, which is what the healthy soul tie that David had to Saul's son, Jonathan. And although this was a healthy soul tie, remember, Jonathan is still Saul's son. We cannot escape that fact. We cannot ignore it. It's right there in scripture. So David was soul tied to Saul. And that means that what happened is that some of Saul's narcissistic ways got into David's DNA, right? All of that trauma, as even the trauma of Saul trying to kill David. So David ended up being trauma bonded to Saul because of Saul trying to kill him. This spiritual father, this man he looked up to as a spiritual father, is now after him, trying to kill him. So he's trauma bonded as well as being soul tied to Saul, right? And so all of this got passed down to quite a few of David's sons who were narcissistic. We got Amnon being narcissistic. We've got Absalom being narcissistic. And then right before David dies, we've got Adonijah following in Absalom's footsteps of leading a revolt against David, his father, and trying to strip the kingdom away from him. So David just could not escape it. So that's why they always say, be careful of who you hang around, right? And so that seed of rejection, which was passed down David's line, led to his sons being susceptible to soul ties, right? And then it also led to them having issues of narcissism, right? And that means a person who's narcissistic, they've got issues with their moral compass. And what I want to do right now, I want to read from Dr. Gary Chapman's book entitled The 5 Love Languages of Teenagers. And we're going to talk about the effects of acceptance and rejection when it comes to teenagers, okay? Because in what I'm going to read in this passage, it helps you to understand just how important it is for acceptance, and then the implications for not doing so, right? And so the thing is, the implications can be very dramatic. Like I said, issues can develop with their moral character, right? And such as narcissism, and then you end up running into some individuals having psychopathy, right? And pathological personality slash character disorders, right? And so, like I said, but the thing is about it is that we cannot ignore the fact that David had soul ties to Saul, both Saul and his son. Okay. And so I'm going to read from Dr. Gary Chapman's book that's entitled The Five Love Languages of Teenagers. And this is in the section that's entitled The Teen's Desire for Acceptance. And then the subheading is The Power of Acceptance and Rejection. A second element of emotional love is feeling accepted by parents. One 14-year-old boy said, "The main thing I like about my parents is that they accept me for who I am. They don't try to make me like my older sister. This teenager feels loved, and this love comes from being accepted by his parents. My parents like me. I'm okay." These are the messages played in the mind of the teenager who feels accepted. The opposite of acceptance is rejection. Its messages are, they don't like me, I'm not good enough for them, they wish I were different. The child who feels rejected obviously does not feel loved. Anthropologist Ronald Rohner has studied rejection in more than 100 cultures around the world. His findings are clear. Although cultures differ in how they express rejection, rejected children everywhere are at heightened risk for numerous psychological problems. These problems range from low self esteem to deficient moral development, and from difficulty in handling aggression to confused sexual identity. Rohner believes that the efforts, right, and effects of rejection are so strong that he calls rejection a psychological malignancy that spreads throughout a child's emotional system, wreaking havoc. Okay. So I just wanted to make that very clear on the effects, just to give you guys an idea of the effects of rejection when it comes to our children, right? And so when you want to go back to looking at this history of how David's sons ended up with a lot of Saul's mess in their souls. Remember, Saul attempted to murder David through the Philistine army. David murders Uriah through, right, the armies, okay? The opposing armies, right? And then you have Absalom who murders his half brother Amnon through his servants. And it's almost like a game of who murdered who through who, right? That's almost another party of its own, okay? And so what happens is that, like Ecclesiastes says, there is nothing new under the sun, because even today, we've got all of this kind of stuff going on. The culture is different. However, right, and the times are different, and we have more technology available that's at our hands and at the hands of our children. However, the same things are going on. It's the same sins rather. We've just become, unfortunately, more crafty and I guess I would say, and even cunning in how we hide behind our masks, right? And so what happens is that, like I said, you've got Tamar leaving Amnon's house, okay? She happens to embark upon her brother Absalom, right? As she leaves his house. And he sees her in the state that she's in with a torn dress, right? And is tattered, and she's a tattered hot mess, right? And so he knows, he puts two and two together and asks her if Amnon had been with her. And what was Tamar's response? Yes. And she tells him about it, right? And so he basically like kind of downplays it then and tells her, no, this is your brother. Don't worry about it. Don't take it to heart. I will take care of it. Okay. And so he takes care of it. All right. He has Amnon killed through his servants while they're all partying and drinking and having a good time. They're full of spirits. He gives them a command to kill Amnon as if he is God himself, right? And he's almost repeating the exact words that were in Joshua 1:9. I want you to listen to Absalom's words and what happened in 2 Samuel 13:26 through 29. And Absalom said, if not, I pray thee, let my brother Amnon go with us. And the king said to him, why should he go with thee? But Absalom pressed him, and he let Amnon and all the king's sons go with him. And Absalom commanded his servants, saying, mark ye now, when Amnon's heart is merry with wine. So he's telling, pay attention when you know he's drunk, right? He'd had way over too much. And when I say to you, smite Amnon, then slay him. Fear not. Have not I commanded you? Be courageous and be valiant. And the servants of Absalom did to Amnon as Absalom had commanded. Then all the king's sons arose, and they rode each upon his mule and fled. All of this took place 2 years after Tamar had been raped. Okay, not right after. This was 2 years. So Amnon is sitting, both him and David are walking around with anger, bitterness, and resentment building up. Neither one of them say anything to Amnon about what he's done. Absalom has 2 years, right, to get all of this worked out in his mind of how he's going to do this. Okay? And can you only begin to imagine, though, the amount of bitterness, anger, and resentment and the spirit of offense that has set in, right? Upon first glance, it would appear that Absalom was taking justice into his own hands and that this was part of the reason of his actions. But if you look further down into 2 Samuel, you realize Absalom's desire is to become king. And so, although Amnon violated his sister, and anyone would be outraged at this, that their sister had been violated, right? Absalom's revolt against his father as king showed you where his real intentions lied, okay? And it also showed you how he used the unfortunate trauma of his sister being violated as an opportunity to get rid of a possible rival to the throne, a rival and heir to the throne at the same time. Absalom is what we call an opportunist. What is an opportunist? The definition of an opportunist, at least this is my definition, is any person who uses another person's trauma, drama, sin, brokenness, calling, position, material possessions, wealth, passion, wiring, etc., to advance or promote him or herself. David was surrounded by narcissistic people wearing disguises of appearing to be in alliance for him, right? In reality, what they were out to do was to steal his identity, to kill him physically, right? And literally, and to destroy his purpose and his family at all costs. And even Bathsheba's grandfather got caught up in the mess, okay, of being pulled into his David's son Absalom's revolt against his own father, right? Ahithophel. And after everything went down, he ended up going and hanging himself for his position in the whole situation, right? And so Absalom flees to Geshur after he's murdered his half-brother, Amnon, and he stays there for 3 years. And you probably think, well, maybe she's forgotten about the party. We're standing here in the hallway waiting to get in. No, I haven't forgotten at all. I know you're dressed, you're beautiful, you got your colorful gowns and masks on, and you got your dates there, right? With the bow ties and cummerbunds. I haven't forgotten, okay? We are ready to open the door for door number 3. And when we open up and look inside, we've got Joab, right? Who convinces this wise woman from Tekoa to pretend like she's mourning for her sole surviving son. And this son, unfortunately, has allegedly just killed his brother, okay? So I want to read to you exactly what the scripture says from 2 Samuel, the 14th chapter, okay? Joab, son of Zeruiah, knew that the king's heart longed for Absalom. So Joab sent someone to Tekoa and had a wise woman brought from there. He said to her, pretend you are in mourning, dress in mourning clothes, and don't use any cosmetic lotions. Act like a woman who has spent days grieving for the dead. Then go to the king and speak these words to him. And Joab put the words in her mouth. So this woman approaches David with the story. When the woman from Tekoa went to the king, she fell with her face to the ground to pay him honor, and she said, "Help me, your majesty." The king asked her, What's troubling you? She said, "I am a widow. My husband is dead. I, your servant, had two sons. They got into a fight with each other in the field, and no one was there to separate them. One struck the other and killed him. Now the whole clan has risen up against your servant. They say, 'Hand over the one who struck his brother down, so that we may put him to death for the life of his brother whom he killed. Then we'll get rid of the heir as well.' They would put out the burning coals I have left, leaving my husband neither name nor descendant on the face of the earth." He empathized with her. And then he let her know that she had nothing to worry about. Her son would be okay. Her husband would have an heir for his name, and everything would go as planned. And to that effect, the wise woman from Tekoa asked David, how could he, in so many words, right? She had a backhanded way of asking him, but how could he, in so many words, have had empathy for her with his situation going on? And like I said, she had a backhanded way of hinting what she was talking about, right? And so what ended up happening is that David put two and two together. And he realized that his right hand man, Joab, was behind the whole concoction. His discerning spirit picked up on this. And remember, David had been given the spirit of the Lord. It left from Saul and had rushed upon David when David was anointed as king, right? And it says, then the king answered the woman, "Do not hide from me anything I ask you." And the woman said, "Let my lord the king speak." The king said, "Is the hand of Joab with you in all of this?" The woman answered and said, "As surely as you live, my lord the king, one cannot turn to the right hand or to the left from anything my lord the king has said. It was your servant Joab who commanded me. It was he who put all of these words in the mouth of your servant. In order to change the course of things, your servant Joab did this. But my Lord has wisdom like the wisdom of the angel of God to know all things that are on the earth." This is really a trip when you think about it. So the woman of Tekoa, she wore a mask, right? And this was on behalf of Joab. So I just want to make sure that I'm making this very clear. She wore a mask of reconciliation on behalf of Joab, right? And so the thing about it is that she was just part of the masquerade party, volunteering to do what Joab wanted her to do, right? And so although Joab's, who was David's right-hand man, knew that David's heart longed to see his son, his real motive was just to gain favor from the king. That was the real motive behind all of this. Joab himself was an opportunist, okay? And we're able to see this from other times in scripture where he used his power to kill other people to make sure that no one else was able to get that position of being David's right-hand man. Anytime that he felt that that position was threatened, you were going to be taken out, okay? And so one thing that was good in this case is that David was not left on the floor bleeding out like the soap opera characters, like the man of God, right, who was bleeding out from the lion who killed him on the road. No, Joab did not cause that to happen, right? Because David had a come to Jesus moment, right? And the thing about it is that David got caught up in the wise woman's story because of the spirit of familiarity, okay? That's what ended up pulling him in. And Joab, the opportunist rather, uses the fact that David's heart turned unto one of conviction when confronted by wise older people, right? And then he tells him stories that exactly matches his situation to help pull him in. And that's why we often have to be careful who we're around, right? Who's around and who knows everything that pricks and convicts our hearts, right? So some of the characters that's in your story, they're not your friends. They are opportunists. They are not loyal to your cause, to your purpose, to your calling. They are loyal to themselves. Okay. And so you have been wounded from your family's love story garden, right? And you've made a vow to yourself and everybody else that I'm never, ever going to deal with anybody else like my mother or father again, right? Except the thing is that you do it. And because of your seed of rejection, you do just that. Your brain searches for familiar spirits from your childhood, and you get hooked right up with that narcissistic individual, right? And it's just like a battery. On one side, you've got the negative charge, you're the negative charge. And that narcissistic partner that's waiting to match up with you has the positive charge. You've created a battery of a toxic dance cycle, right? And so what happened is that David allowed Joab to bring Absalom back from Geshur. However, he would not see him. David suffered from the spirit of avoidance. And remember, an avoidant attachment style is when you either isolate yourself and or you give a person something differently from what they are asking from you. And so Absalom was in Geshur 3 years, isolated from David. Absalom is allowed to return back to Jerusalem. However, instead of David giving Absalom what he wanted, which was to see him and to confront everything that happened, David tells Joab he's not to come into my face and see my face. This went on for 2 years. So you've got 5 years total that both David and Absalom are sitting with spirit of seeds of rejection, the spirit of anger, spirit of bitterness, and a spirit of offense. And that's basically how we keep what I call from the 5L cycle of freedomology, where it helps you to understand the patterns of behavior that you have and how to break them. That's how we keep that cycle going, right? And that cycle is love, lies, limiting beliefs, learned stress response leads to a limited worldview. It's all fueled by the seed of rejection, the spirit of anger, the spirit of bitterness, and the spirit of offense. Okay. And it says in the scriptures, so Absalom lived 2 full years in Jerusalem without coming into the king's presence. Then Absalom sent for Joab to send him to the king. But Joab would not come to him. And he sent the second time, but Joab would not come. Then he said to his servants, see Joab's field is next to mine, and he's at Bali there. Go and set it on fire. Talk about a childish prank, right? So Absalom's servants set the field on fire. Then Joab arose and went to Absalom at his house and said to him, why have your servants set my field on fire? Absalom answered Joab, because behold, I sent word to you. Come here that I might send you to the king to ask, why have I come here from Geshur? It would have been better for me to be there still. Now, therefore, let me go into the presence of the king. And if there is any guilt in me, let him put me to death. Then Joab went to the king and told him, and he summoned Absalom. So he came to the king and bowed himself on his face before the king. And the king kissed Absalom. And although this appears as a reconciliation, it's really not. Absalom wanted the kingdom to begin with. And like I said, and just stating again, he had 5 years for all of that seed of rejection, spirit of anger, spirit of bitterness, spirit of offense to fester and just make his heart a heart of stone, literally, right? And when you have all of these going on and the seed of rejection is driving you, right? There's no stopping what it is that you end up doing. There's no telling because you're being fueled by a seed of rejection. You're being fueled by the lust of the flesh and not of the spirit at all, right? And those spirits of familiarity can have you delaying your discernment process like it did with David initially. But he had that come to Jesus moment and he put two and two together that Joab was behind it. Nathan the prophet had come to David with the parable of a shepherd whose sheep had been killed in order for the rich man to be satisfied, right? And so it pulled David in and broke his seared conscience, right? And it allowed him to see where he went wrong with the sin of adultery and also the sin of murder, right? And so Joab, being cunning as he was, decided he was going to mimic that same situation with the wise woman from Tekoa. Okay? Be careful, once again, of who you tell your stories to, as well as who participates in your story, because a lot of them could be opportunists. And when people know what it is that tugs at your heartstrings, they can actually use that to their advantage and agenda. Remember, you are enough. Rebuild your family's love story garden, right? Reclaim your power, soul, and identity. Grab your keys to the kingdom and get your inheritance. God bless. And until next time, when we're going over part 3.
There was a son, he was devoured by earth. There was a God, they call him the Father. And there was a means to make a valley with grace out of this hole that I've dug for me. He made a valley of grace where things would change, and maybe they'd take up the cross high again. The valley of grace was never the same after he had died. The love that refines, there's no sense in trying to do it on my own. He gave more than I could have known. He turned those valleys into places to learn, instead of burn and perish away. And nights never so cold without his grace. How could I say that I've seen the world from his great love? How could I know what he could love? How would I've seen what he had in store for me if I didn't give up and let him be my valley of grace, where things would change, and maybe they'd take up the cross high again. The valley of grace. Never was the same after he had died. The love that refines. So much I wish I could give back, but I'm not intact to be sharing all of that. You took the price to give me that life, and now it's never gonna fade away. When I see I need more of him, he whispers the sweetest of mercies upon my ears, and I won't go back the way it was again, again, again. And now a valley of grace where things would change. I've seen the lights of valley of grace where things have changed. Oh, I've seen so much for me.